Okay.
Thanks for coming out, everybody. This is the Penn State World Campus Technology Club, and our guest speaker tonight is Doug Barbin, and he will be talking about cybersecurity compliance. Thanks, Doug, for coming out. And
excellent. Thank you, Ray. Thank you very much for the invitation. Happy to be here. We don't have a huge group, so by all means, please make this interactive. Ask questions. I had the pleasure of watching a couple excerpts from some of your previous meetings. So expectations are this is a pretty technical group that can ask some good questions, and I'll kind of steer in whatever direction you want to steer in. Compliance is not necessarily the sexiest topic on the planet, so try to make it as interesting as we can. So there we go. All right, background at me. I am a second generation Nittany Lion, as my parents, they're class of 1970. I'm class of 97. I did a dual major in accounting and administration of justice. It might be called crime, law, and justice now, but was in the Blue Band, the Justice Association, Alpha Kappa Psi business fraternity. Had a great time. Graduated in 97, spent 5 years in the DC area. First 3 years I was with Price Waterhouse, and then became PwC. My third year was when they merged with Coopers and Lybrand. Then I went to a startup internet security company in 2000, Gardent, and Gardent was bought by VeriSign in 2004. I was there for the better part of 10 years. I did leave and go back. I was the CTO of a mortgage company, of a mortgage insurance company for about a year, and that was in 2007. So if you know your history with respect to mortgage meltdowns, that 2007 was probably the worst year to be in any sort of mortgage-related business or company whatsoever. So I came back to VeriSign and continued working there. Did everything imaginable, from consulting, risk assessments, testing. I did a lot of computer forensics. That was I started off in Price Waterhouse as a forensic accountant, and then segued into computer forensics and did incident response and a lot of those things. Nowadays at Shellman, I've been at Shellman for I've been at Shellman for 10 years. So I joined Shellman at the end of 2009. And we're just an assessment firm. That's all we do. That's what we'll talk about tonight is the compliance audits, the SOC, ISO, PCI, HIPAA, HITRUST, all of those different things. That's all that Shellman does. It's been a pretty great experience. When I joined, there was less than 20 of us at the firm. Now we're 230 people approximately. We're a top 100 CPA firm. It's a cool distinction that we made it into over the last 2 years, and the only firm in that top 100 CPA firms list that does not do financial accounting, tax, or any of the boring types of accounting. Otherwise, try to remain active. As you see here, this was taken a couple of years ago when I was back at campus. My kids are 11 and 14 now. Try to keep, obviously they keep me very busy with sports, and one's a cheerleader and the other's a soccer and lacrosse player when sports existed, which they don't currently. Then volunteer-wise, been a proud member of the Penn State Sacramento chapter for several years. I was the president for I think 6 or 7 years. I helped put together the first B-Side Sacramento conference back last fall. That was a blast. And also volunteer with an organization called the Sean Brock Foundation. It's founded by a friend of mine from grad school who lost his best friend in Iraq to he was in the Marines, and so he started a scholarship foundation for children whose parents are either hurt or killed in action. So that's me in a nutshell. Like I said, happy to be here, happy to be amongst Penn Staters as well. I was going to point out that, at Shellman, there are 5 Penn Staters that we have on the team, and 2 of them are World Campus grads, including one of my senior managers who's up in the Seattle area. Nick, he was a World Campus grad, and he oversees the federal cybersecurity compliance audits that we do here on the West Coast, which I'll talk about in a minute. So, all right. So why do we care about all this stuff, right? Policy, compliance, standards, acronyms, security, because that's going to be the focus here. I didn't come to this group to talk about administrative types of regulatory compliance. We are going to keep this on the topic of cybersecurity. and different types of security, compliance requirements that the companies face and that people need to know about. My goal with this is to, have you leave here a little bit more armed with respect to, what some of these topics are. I'm sure you've seen them before, but, again, I'm happy to deep dive into whatever level of granularity that you want to in all this. But why do people do this? I think I stole this visual on the side from a presentation from an Oracle, something that Oracle put on. I do some work with them, but I did a presentation with one of their security executives back last year, and we had this. I kind of jokingly stole it from their site, but it is, some of the different elements. Why do people care about compliance and with respect to security? Well, privacy is obviously a big topic, and security is as well. But the purpose of compliance is really to be able to tell a story, to communicate to a customer or to a user or even an employee, to articulate what it is that the organization does to protect its information, right? So, and what that means, can vary widely based on what industry you are. So for some organizations, for some verticals, it's cost entry. If you don't have a SOC report, for instance, you're probably not going to get any work with a financial institution. If you can't comply with HIPAA, probably not going to get too far with healthcare providers. ISO certification for international organizations and so forth. So it is market specific. It is in many cases a vendor due diligence. You want to do business with a company. They're going to ask, well, tell me about your compliance, your certifications. They'll oftentimes call them audits or certifications interchangeably. They might be wrong. They're usually asking the wrong question, but in many cases they mean the same things. What kinds of audits have you gone through and certifications have you done to show that you're meeting your commitments and doing what you say you're doing? And then, last but not least, the competition. We see this all the time. If one authentication services provider has got ISO 27001 certification, you can bet that their competitors are going to be doing that shortly thereafter. And ISO certification, which we'll get into here, but to kind of show the market, to talk about the market implications there. Maybe 15 years ago, 40% of all the ISO 27001 certifications, the ISO certification for security, 40% of them were in Japan. And then you saw Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and some of the other big players get these certifications. And then from there, you saw all of the other cloud providers wanting to match and maintain equal statute from a compliance or a certification perspective. And so that's where the market piece of it comes into play. It's a very strong factor, because as an auditor, when we go in and talk to a prospective client, what we can do for them isn't as important. I'm not gonna, there's no reason for me to sell them an assessment or an audit that they don't need. They're getting their needs from their customers. Their customers are saying, I need this, I need HIPAA, I need SOC, I need PCI, I need one of these. That's up to them to figure out with their customers. Our job is to come in and do a typically a coordinated set of assessments and issue whatever reports it is that they need to provide to those customers. So what are the most common ones? And this will just we'll kind of jump into it. And again, my goal here is to arm you with more, with more knowledge and insights in terms of doing this. Here's there's a litany of things that you will see out there. I recommend any of you go to Microsoft, Azure, or Amazon Web Services, any of their websites, into their compliance pages, and you're going to see a whole litany of stamps and acronyms and certifications. So what I wanted to touch on tonight was the most, kind of the most common ones. So SOC 2, ISO certification, PCI, FedRAMP, HIPAA High Trust, and we'll talk a little bit about privacy as well. But again, the goal is, as you see these certifications on the websites of major cloud providers and other service providers and so forth as well, to kind of get an understanding for what that, means. So, all right, starting off, I'm going to go from kind of higher level to more generalized to more specific and robust. So a SOC report, a SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, those are the three types of reports that are out there. And so a SOC report is a report that's performed by a licensed CPA firm Back in the day, these were called SAS 70 audits. That was the original term. And where the genesis of this was let's go all the way back to early 2000s, Sarbanes-Oxley era, and so forth. What you had is you had a payroll company like an ADP or anybody else that was providing services that were important to their customers' financial statements. So if I'm a financial statement auditor, I need to look at my clients' data and their financial transactions and do my reconciliation, but obviously payroll is important. And everyone was using, ADP and other types of providers, payroll online. Well, how do I get comfort that the data that they're providing me out of ADP is secure and reliable and so forth? And what happened was they invented these SAS 70 audits so that ADP, rather than me having to go ask ADP a million questions and thousands of other auditors on behalf of customers audit these shared services providers, they said, okay, here's a report that you can, ADP goes and gets their audit, from a Big Four firm or whoever, and then they provide it to their customers. And so then they can use that and they can rely on that when they're doing their testing. That report, that old SAS 70 report, is most equivalent to today's SOC 1, because the SOC 1 report is one where you're doing an audit of a service provider that has some sort of impact on their customers' financial data or financial statement in some way, shape, or form. It used to be that was the most common, not as much anymore. Today, sorry, I get the questions up now. No, SOC stands for System and Organizational Controls Audit. It used to be actually Service Organizational Controls, but then they changed it. So my bad. Yeah, SOC is System and Organizational Controls. If you Google AICPA SOC reports, that's where you'll see that. No problem. Keep them. I've got the box up now, so keep them coming, or just interrupt me. Either way. So why is SOC 2 first? Well, SOC 2 is first because we see more of that now than a SOC 1. A SOC 2 actually opines on security, availability, confidentiality, and a couple other categories. And where SOC 2 really started to take off, say after the 2011-2012 timeframe when it really was launched, was the idea that you could have a system, a cloud service, a data center, didn't necessarily have to have anything to do with a financial statement or financial data. They just wanted to be able to communicate that they were secure, what their security controls were that were in place and tested and validated by a third party, and that also includes like availability and so forth as well. And so, so for us now, a firm who specializes in this, we crossed the line maybe 2 years ago where we now do more SOC 2 work than we do issue more SOC 2 reports than we do issue SOC 1 reports. And that's because there's such a broader use case. Again, you don't have to have anything to do with financial to get a SOC 2 report. You can be an analytics company, you can be a managed services provider, you can be a security as a service provider, and a Slack, a Splunk, an Okta, any of those types of tech companies would be ones that would go through SOC 2. And again, the goal of the SOC 2 report is to give to your customers to show that that you have adequate security controls in place. Now, what's different about these versus some of the other ones we'll talk to is that the criteria, the requirements are pretty high level. There's nothing in SOC 2 that tells you how long a password should be. There's nothing that says, reset your passwords every 30 days, 90 days, any of those elements. What SOC 2 is meant to be is it's meant to be commitment based, and it's meant to be an attestation, which means I'm going in to audit that the company is doing what they say they're doing. So I don't care if they're doing 7-character passwords or 20-character passwords, but if they say they're doing 20-character passwords, I'm going to test them to confirm that they're doing 20-character passwords, and that's what's going to be in the report. All that detail gets included in the report for the reader to digest. Last nuance, there are two types. The AICPA is horrible with naming, numbering. It confuses everybody. Trust me. So you've got SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, but then you've got Type 1 and Type 2, which are the Type 1 is typically your first audit. It's a point-in-time audit, whereas a Type 2 is something that looks back in time and tests performance. So, for instance, in a Type 2, looking back in time, if we're looking back a year, I'm going to ask the client for a listing of people that were hired over the course of, you're right, should be Type A or B. So it should be, they're not English majors, accounting majors, but you know, if I'm looking back over the course of the year, I'm going to say, please provide me the list of all the people that were hired or fired, and then I'm going to take a sample of those and say, please show me the workflow of how they were onboarded or provided access granted, and you know, and so forth as well. So, any questions on SOC? I'm going to move along kind of quickly here. So. All right, ISO certification. I kind of threw this out there before. So for anybody that's not as familiar with it, isn't familiar with ISO 27001 certification, we've all probably driven along the road and seen a manufacturing or a factory or something along those lines that say ISO 9001. So ISO 9001 is the standard for quality, and it has to do with certifying a company's quality management system. Well, what 27001 is the security equivalent of that, of certifying a company's information security management system. So so it's, you know, don't think of it as it does have some controls. It's got about 100 controls, but think of it more as you're certifying the process for a company to be able to assess itself, figure out where the risks are, apply controls, and then implement controls, and to kind of govern themselves over the course of the, you know, as they're certified. So, you know, what's different in ISO, you know, like SOC 2, it doesn't have super stringent controls. They're a little bit more stringent, but ISO's focus is really around what we call the management system. You know, clauses 4 through 10, those are the clauses within the actual standard itself. But what's important is that ISO measures your ability to be able to, they call it plan, do, check, act, right? So you plan, you implement, then you monitor yourself, and then you come back and you risk assess and you adjust, and it's kind of that ultra learning thing. So the numbering, very good question. So the 27,000 series is the umbrella series for everything security, for everything related to the security management system. So within that, there probably are 30 to 40 sub numbers under there. ISO 27002, for instance, is implementation guidance and recommendations on how to comply with the controls in ISO 27001. ISO 27006 is the one that guides us, the auditors, to tell us how to do our work and what we need to be doing. The ones that are important that you'll see here, ISO 27017 and 27018 came out a few years ago, and it was because cloud computing was making such a big push. They wanted to take what were some otherwise generic security requirements in ISO 27001 and bolt on some additional requirements for cloud. So that's exactly what that is. So cloud security is 27017. Cloud privacy starts to bring privacy into it a little bit more, looks at how, you know, if you've got a privacy policy posted, your opt-in and opt-out uses of data, and so forth as well. 27701 is the newest one. So and what that was is it's an international standard that was meant to be a certification mechanism for GDPR, for the international privacy regulations. There still is no technically accepted means to communicate that. But ISO, you know, the ISO committees, you know, one of the things you'll find is there are definitely competing standards. Someone's always trying to come up with a new standard that one-ups somebody else. But the ISO Standards Committee came up with 27701 to add additional controls and requirements to test for privacy, for privacy information management. So right, you have GDPR internationally. You've got you could apply some of the concepts to California's Consumer Protection Privacy Act, things like that, and so forth as well. Got a question on how frequently they're updated? 5 years-ish. It definitely varies. If you go and you look at the updates, 27001 was updated, maybe less than that, or maybe less often than that. Last update for 27001 was 2013. It was 2008 before that. 27018 was just updated last year. 27701 just came out. So yeah, fair to say that the cloud, could be updated more. You're right, because 27018 was probably only 3 or 4 years old, and it was updated again. However, the updates weren't. I wouldn't consider the updates overly significant. Still somewhat broad concepts, but they talk about, they do get to the point where they want to make sure your management system can accommodate kind of, call it core cloud concepts of whether it's IaaS or, hypervisors and so forth and forth. You're not going to see any kind of detail in there around containers or something, something that specific, but that's definitely there as well. CSA Star certification is actually an industry certification, the Cloud Security Alliance. For anybody that's into cloud, I highly recommend going and looking at what the Cloud Security Alliance has put out. They have got a wealth of research out there with respect to what are the bad things that can happen in cloud computing environments. It's been an organization that I've been involved with and volunteering with for the better part of a decade as well. But they've got a lot of research out there. They publish a cloud control matrix. They also have individual certifications, the CCSK, the Certificate of Cloud Security Knowledge Base, I think is what that is. I've got that. I was one of the first ones to get that. It's a good certification because it kind of teaches you core cloud computing concepts from the acronyms of software as a service, infrastructure as a service, to core cloud security concepts and so forth as well. It's a good basic. It's a good. Not to say it's better than basic. It's a good certification for being able to talk cloud to anybody that wants to to talk cloud with you. So one of the things that they do is they have a certification, not for an individual but for a company who has an ISO 27001 certification. If you take that and you bolt on their additional requirements and controls for cloud computing, you can be CSA Star certified as well. So last, I mentioned ISO 9001 for comparison purposes. So we do some of that as well. We're an ISO 9001 certification shop. That doesn't mean we go out and test manufacturing sites and home builders and things like that. We are very solidly in the IT space, but the reason we got accredited to do 9001 is because we were hearing from our software development clients that, hey, I'd like to get 9001 certified to be able to demonstrate that I have a quality software development process. And that's important, as a marketing message, but it's also important in the pharmaceutical space where they actually have requirements around software development and quality maintenance and so forth with respect to that. So, any questions on ISO? Very good questions so far. You guys can unmute as well. So, cool. All right, healthcare. So there's the first bullet on here, are you a business associate? I guess I'll back up briefly, for those that don't know the difference. Kids and dog are surprisingly quiet right now. We did a walk earlier today. But so first question, the first bullet up here, are you a business associate? What that means is that in the world of HIPAA and healthcare compliance, you're either what they call a covered entity or a business associate. A covered entity is a hospital, it's an insurance provider, it's anybody who has a direct relationship with a patient. A business associate would be anybody else that may partake in that data. So it could be a data center, it could be a hosting provider, it could be a claims management provider. Someone who takes healthcare data, maybe doesn't typically have a direct relationship with a patient, but handles it and has to, by default, has to comply with strict security requirements in order to protect that data. So so a business associate, that's a business associate. We work with a lot of business associates. We work with both types of companies, but when you consider some of the big players like your United Healthcares and Kaiser Permanentes and so forth, they're all over the world. They have all sorts of relationships with billing processors and hosting providers and so forth, and they need a means to make sure that they're meeting their security requirements as well. So HIPAA was passed back in 1996. It was the first of its kind. What's interesting about HIPAA was the first law that had security, but also had criminal penalties. It was literally the first law that came out for security where a CEO could go to jail. CEO or CIO could go to jail if they mishandled patient data. So that was significant back in 1996. And then high tech came out after that, just kind of as a bolt-on to it, and it gave HIPAA some more teeth. And then, but it also provided things like breach notification requirements. So when you've seen, if you've ever seen a healthcare provider who's had to take out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal to say that they occurred in breach, and they're providing notice and things like that, that probably comes from the High Tech Act. HIPAA didn't have that kind of teeth to it, but High Tech said that if you have a breach and the data is not encrypted and the data has been leaked or exposed, you are required to notify, your customers or the people that were impacted by it. Now, and if it's a big breach and they can't determine how extensive it was, that's when you see people make public announcements and so forth as well. So there's no such thing as HIPAA certified, despite the fact that if you were to Google that, you'd probably see 50 different examples of companies claiming that they're HIPAA certified. There's actually no such thing. The only people that can really audit you for HIPAA is the government and the health and, which is Health and Human Services. So what we do is sometimes sometimes our clients will ask us to come in and do an assessment and tell them whether or not they comply with the HIPAA requirements. And what we'll do is we'll follow the same, because it's an open standard. We'll follow the same audit plan that the government would follow if they were coming in. Now, granted, we don't have to publish this report or anything like that. It's just for the client. But we can go in and we can test against the same controls. Question is HIPAA better now? Any protocols to mask PII? So I think in general things are getting better, because one of the things, and if you're talking like masking and so forth, we've seen a lot of technology come out that does, masking is one way to call it. It's commonly referred to as de-identification, right? So you've got a record in a database that's got my name, maybe it's got some sort of other information associated with the treatment that I had performed. But maybe for the purposes of analytics, if you're just looking to count the number of people who take a certain medication, who take cholesterol medication or something like that, maybe you don't need the name. So if I'm a provider that is doing analytics on those types of counts, and I can get that data without getting the name, without getting anything identifiable, that does lower the risk, right? That personal information could be compromised. So there is a lot of that. They've taken a lot of the technology that financial services is used to take and mask a credit card number, can also be used to mask elements of a healthcare record. It's just a lot more complicated in healthcare, because in a credit card number, you're looking for a 15 or 16 digit number that's formatted a certain way, or a social security number exactly. And you can apply logic to mask that or tokenize that and obfuscate that and so forth. HIPAA is a little bit tougher because healthcare records can exist in a variety of different forms and formats, and and there's a lot of debates and discussions that kind of go on what constitutes personally identifiable information, and it does sometimes depend on the type of entity that you're dealing with. We've got several clients, but one in particular I work with up in Seattle that does healthcare billing. And so, they have to be ultra sensitive, because it's just, one would take a step back and say, oh, it's just billing. I'm not getting the medical records, or I don't know what the diagnosis was, or what this person was treated for, and so forth. But if you're processing a bill and it says Jane Smith from the Chemotherapy Institute of Sacramento, California, it's probably a good indication that she's a cancer patient. And now you've identified that just by the relationship of what was in there. So it does depend, and there's a lot more work that goes into it. High trust is something out there. High trust has been around for close to 20 years now, and high trust, maybe 15 years. High trust was an attempt to take HIPAA and try to turn it into a certification. So it is an actual certification, but you can are accurate if you say you're high trust certified. But it requires adherence to kind of a stricter set of standards. So the High Trust Alliance took the HIPAA requirements and then took a whole bunch of other compliance requirements and came up with a much more prescriptive standard that that companies can test against and then issue reports on. So you definitely have healthcare companies out there, quite a few healthcare companies out there now that want their business associates, the companies that they share data with, to have high trust certification. So they'll force them to go through that. Any other questions on healthcare? Awesome. Okay. PCI DSS. Let's see, this one's also been around for, geez, now 16 or 17 years in different forms. By all, by comparison purposes, it's a mature standard. The short version is the payment card industry data security standard applies to any company that store, processes, or transmits a credit card number. And by a credit card number, we get a lot of questions. Is that a debit card? Is that a credit card? It's anything that carries a Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, JCP, if you Diners Club, if you even know what that is, type of brand on it. So anytime so it's anybody who processes, it's anyone who stores, it's anyone, even if you're just doing a redirect website management to transmit cardholder data, anybody that touches it along the way has to comply with the standard, as does anybody that impacts the security of a cardholder data environment, of someone else's cardholder data environment. So for instance, if a network management company is managing routers for Home Depot or any other retailer, Walmart, any other type of retailer, if they're remotely managing the routers that control access into the network, then they too have to comply with these rules, because obviously those companies are handling large amounts of credit card data on a daily basis. So cloud providers very much fall into this. They host payment applications. Data center providers, cloud computing providers, Amazon, Microsoft all have PCI compliance reports that they have issued, because their customers will develop and deploy applications into those cloud environments in order to be able to process, transmit cardholder data. So PCI, very specific, more than 300 controls. And this is where you get down to 7-character passwords, lockouts, change every 30, lockouts after 90 days, multi-factor authentication, perimeter firewalls, patches that have to be updated with high-risk findings updated within 30 days, and detailed policies and procedures, security awareness and training, IDS, log monitoring. Again, 12 different families of controls that make up the PCI DSS. It is very detailed. It can be very excruciating. It is, and it's pass-fail. It's one of the few that you have to get 100% in order to be deemed PCI compliant. You can't have a 6-character password with no other workaround to compensate for that and call yourself compliant. You can pass 299 controls, not pass one, and you would not be deemed compliant. So it is very stringent, very challenging to get through. But again, it's been around, since it was started back in the 2004-2005 time period. It was started independently by Visa and MasterCard. Now it's overseen by kind of a board of where they've got representatives from the different card brands, from Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, and so forth. So there's a kind of a standard assessment process with the 300 controls, but there's also some other application specific assessments as well. So you can go through like a shopping cart, like an online shopping cart, and go through a slightly different type of assessment that looks at the code and looks at how it handles cardholder data. Those point of sale terminals that you see in stores, Micros or whoever else, the card swipes and so forth, they go through their own assessment process and audit process as well. So so yeah, it's an extensive, it's definitely an extensive standard. It's coming out with a new version this year. This one comes out, they're on version 4. So kind of every 5 or 6 years or so, is 4 or 5 years as well, from a life cycle on that one. So, any questions on PCI? All right. Okay, good time-wise. All right, good old federal government. So a lot has changed in the federal government in the last 5 or 6 years. So, geez, there's so many acronyms here. Try not to lose you on this one. This is where people's eyes glaze over most significantly. So FISMA. FISMA was the Federal Information Security Management Act of 2002. FISMA is a law. FISMA is a law, kind of sits atop all of this stuff. FISMA is the law that says government has to protect its data about its people, about its activities, and so forth as well. So but from there, FISMA doesn't have a lot of detailed requirements. It punts to NIST, National Institute of Standards. So NIST tells you, how to configure your passwords, how to configure your multi-factor authentication, all of those different things as well. So what's changed at least from our vantage point of the last several years is that if a federal government agency wanted to utilize a cloud service provider, they would do their own assessment. Maybe they'd hire a third-party auditor to come in and do it. They called it a variety of things: FISMA assessments, CNA, accreditation, a variety of different things. What the government did, though, is they recognized what we saw in the SOC world, which was there was value to having the cloud provider go through their own audit, do this once, get sponsored by an agency, and then be able to share it with multiple agencies. So the company's getting audited once, and then the results are able to be shared with multiple agencies. And so that's what FedRAMP is, the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program. And so it's come a long way as well. I'll give them credit that they've actually moved along relatively quickly, and they've adapted to changes in technology and other requirements and so forth. But it is by far the most comprehensive of security assessments that are out there. It's based on the NIST standard. That's 330. It depends on how sensitive the information you handle. You can have 330 controls. You can have 425 controls. There's a lot of detail to it that has to be looked at. So when we come in and do FedRAMP audits, there's control testing of all those controls. There's also penetration testing and scanning and all of those technical configuration reviews that have to be performed as well. And that results in I'd say a big report. It's the PCI reports are big. Those could be 200 plus pages. A FedRAMP report is generally smaller, but it's got embedded spreadsheets. So, I mean, if you had those printed out, it would obviously be very, very, very long. The other piece of it that's unique about FedRAMP is that it's the only third-party assessment that involves the second party. So what do I mean by that? Everything else that I've presented so far, client hires me, I come in, I do their audit independently, I issue them a report, they give that to their customers. Our report will generally say clean, not clean, what you comply with, not comply with, et cetera. In FedRAMP, the government gets the final say. So, they review and they approve, they call it the package, which includes the report and the hundreds of pages of documentation that the cloud provider has to provide as well. So they have to be involved. You can't just go out and get a FedRAMP audit done. You have to have a government agency sponsor. There has to be someone who's willing to do business with you that will sponsor the company that's going through it. So it's got an annual component to it. It all happens. Just about everything we've talked about happens every year. And then related topics, I'll just throw out a couple other acronyms. ITAR, International Traffic of Arms Regulation. This is basically the regulation for anything that blows up. But that regulation actually has some security requirements to it around restricting access to only information to only U.S. persons. CGIS is the nice. CGIS is the Criminal Justice Information System. That is, FBI's criminal database and the protection of that data. That database can oftentimes interface with third-party applications, insurance companies, even background investigations companies, and so forth as well. So they've got a series of standards around that. And then the DoD Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification is something that's now new. It's just getting off the ground. Our intention is to be an assessor. They haven't approved any assessors yet. but it is meant to apply security standards and criteria to defense contractors, which is a much larger group of companies than FedRAMP, right? FedRAMP is, you have to be a cloud computing company, cloud service provider that provides, that provides services directly to a federal government agency. So DoD, there are a variety of things on the books today related to procurement and spending. They call them DFARS. The certification, the CMMC that's been released now, the first standard's was released at the end of January. It's posted on their website. It is meant to kind of govern everybody in that defense supply chain. So that's kind of the next thing that's coming from from a federal perspective. So I mentioned this before, so I can skip through it. This is the CSA Star certification. It's like I said, it's an industry standard. It's not a regulatory piece of compliance. It is the Cloud Security Alliance has done really, really good work in trying to take all of these different things that we've talked about and bring them together. And it means with a set of tools and resources that companies can then go to and use and apply to their own environments. Privacy. We could spend an entire hour talking about nothing but privacy. So, the thing about privacy is, everyone talks about, well, where do you draw the line between privacy and security, and can't have privacy without security. That's true. You can have security without privacy. I mean, the best way to look at it is security is around handling handling who can access the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information, right? That's security. It's protecting a known set of data. Privacy assumes that once you have appropriate access to information, what do you do with it? And that is commitment based. That definitely varies from company to company, but it's how you share information, how you store, under what terms do you store information. So the GDPR regulation and so forth really kicked this into higher gear in Europe and really put more emphasis on the person and the person's right to kind of protect and all of their own information. California has, where I live, is taking this to another step with their Consumer Privacy Act, where there's even more stringent penalties for the inappropriate selling or sharing of information. It also provides for things like the ability for a user to request their data be audited or request their data be deleted. None of this stuff is absolute. There's definitely nuances upon nuances when you're navigating through all of this, but this has been the wave. And part of the biggest problem, and especially from our perspective, and more so if you were a lawyer, is the fact that by and large, I mean, there is no national privacy regulation like there is in Europe. Every state kind of does their own thing. So when you're looking at privacy requirements, you have to look at California, Massachusetts, and a variety of other places, New York and other places that have created these laws around it. I emphasize California not because I'm here. It's true. Not because I'm here, but because it's very easy. It's very difficult for a company not to service California consumers. So it's not about where you're based; it's who you're interacting with. So the California Consumer Privacy Act would apply to anybody who services me, because I live in California, regardless of where they're based. So. So we got that. So yeah, a couple other things related to it. There's not a lot in the way of privacy certifications. The ISO 27701, as I mentioned, is an attempt to move in that direction, to apply an ISO-based standard for adherence to GDPR. Just another couple ones as we're wrapping up here to throw out for you. The NIST cybersecurity framework is a good framework if you're at a company and you want to implement a security program. The interesting thing about that company, we get requests. We can assess against the NIST CSF, but generally speaking, it's meant for a company to operate internally because it's a maturity model. So it's not a pass fail or issue a clean report. And in the NIST cybersecurity framework, what's good about that is that it's a 1 to 4 rating with respect to maturity, from nothing to informally to documented to repeatable and automated and so forth. And so what it allows a company to do is that for each of the controls that sit underneath all of those different domains there, they can measure themselves, and then they can say, okay, well, I'd like to improve my my intrusion detection capabilities to get that from a 3 to a 4 and so forth. So it gives them a roadmap to kind of improve themselves. It's not designed to be no one is compliant with the NIST cybersecurity framework. The NIST cybersecurity framework is a tool to be able to manage that within your own company. SOC for cybersecurity, so it was added by the AICPA. Glad they didn't make it SOC 4, or maybe they should have made it SOC 2B. It is a report where a CPA can opine on the cybersecurity program for an organization. We haven't done too many of those. Again, just because something's out there, if a company's customers aren't looking for an audit or compliance report, you're not going to see it get a lot of traction. Maybe it will at some point. There are a variety of financial technologies, fintech regulations that are out there. The FFIAC guides the bank auditors of the government, and then you've got SWIFT, which is for payment systems. New York Department of Financial Cybersecurity Regulations is another one. And you will find as you kind of navigate, you've got energy, you've got different sectors will oftentimes have their own cybersecurity compliance requirements. And you will find more often than not that most of them are variations of a theme. I didn't have the picture in this one. I've done a presentation before where I refer to the NIST 800-53 standard, which is kind of the most commonly used. It gets mapped. Other people point to it. It points to other standards. I call it the Kevin Bacon of compliance standards, because you can you're always 2 degrees away. This particular standard is probably based on, if it's not based on NIST, it's based on something that's based on NIST, type of thing. So, and heck, even the Motion Picture Association of America has a security standard to protect content and to, keep us from being able to watch Wonder Woman, the new James Bond movie, all the things that we could be watching from the comfort of our own home now that we're not at movie theaters. So. And I think just about, I know we're coming up on the time frame here. The only other thing I put in here just for consideration is when you're talking about cloud in particular, it's important to remember that these relationships are complicated, and it's not just, that systems are sitting in a rack somewhere. They are usually, they're in a data center somewhere, but that's, if you're on a website and you've entered your credit card number into a payment application, it's probably bouncing to a transaction processor in one data center, and then it's sending itself to a website hosted at Amazon, and then it's backed up somewhere else in a cloud provider, which sits in a data center. So there's all these intricate relationships that when you're dealing in cloud computing is important to know. When you're dealing in compliance, you really have to kind of look at all the different layers and understand, oh, it goes to Microsoft Azure. Well, okay, well, Azure, Microsoft generally has a lot of their own data centers. Do they use third parties for something else? Whereas it's probably, it may go to an application service provider, which hosts in Microsoft Azure, and you've got all of these different, these different layers. And so we as auditors have to kind of navigate through this a lot, because if the companies want to say, well, we're secure, we want to be able to, we want to be able to say that, we want to be able to say that we've sufficiently understood the different places that, sorry. Suri's talking to me for some reason. Hopefully, it didn't get hijacked there.
Directions to where?
Sorry about that. So yeah, so it's just a matter of navigating the different relationships and subservice organizers and processors, because chances are if you've interacted with a website, there's probably 6 or 7 different different hops there. That's it. Last but not least, these aren't meant to throw out from, yeah, Siri bombed, exactly. These aren't meant to, wouldn't surprise me. These aren't meant to just throw out the buzzwords that we hear out there. We've actually had some cool engagements where we've worked in these different types of technologies. You know, I would say that I've done assessments on AI platforms, on a blockchain platform. I haven't done too much with IoT yet. Definitely containers, but it is the application of a lot of the same things that we've talked about. I mean, it takes someone who understands the technology, understands the risks, understands the intent of what the requirements are trying to get at to apply them to a certain domain. I mean, you know, AI for the most part is basically different types of data analytics, and you know, blockchain is usually just how they're maybe using for a data store. And then, like I said, the containers, we're seeing a lot of Kubernetes, a lot of that, and it requires our people to really stay on top of, you know, we're not experts in technology, we're auditors, but, you know, what we try to do is we try to make good training available for our people so that we're not idiots, we're not sounding like idiots when we're going and asking for things on a platform that's been, you know, that's been deployed in, you know, in containers and so forth. So exactly, Adam, applying lessons learned to newer technologies. That's exactly what this is, and what's coming next. Who knows? I don't see any application for quantum computing yet. I haven't seen anybody that's needed that kind of horsepower, but we're definitely seeing quite a bit of these capabilities. AI is one that's interesting, especially natural. I was talking about machine learning, but what's more interesting is natural language processing, because we were doing an assessment of someone that was a call center, and they were recording, you know, you do call center recordings. Well, natural language processing can take a video recording or an audio recording and put it into a transcript. Well, that's cool, and that allows you to do a lot of great data mining. But what if there's a credit card number in there? What if there's a healthcare diagnosis in there that you've now transcribed and you've made searchable where it wasn't as searchable before? That's where this stuff starts to get interesting. So that was all that I had. I tried to keep it to an hour here from our few minute late starts. Any other questions? And I'll try to hit them as much as possible, as you guys have been firing them through between Adam and Siri. So.
No
Cool.
questions?
Thank you, Ray.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you. It's great having a former Penn Stater.
Yep. Never former. Always a Penn Stater.
Always a Penn Stater. Yeah. Thank you. It was great having you.
Absolutely. You guys stay safe out there, and cheers. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out anytime. So.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Have a good night. All right, take care.